Hello and welcome back to a new episode of The Ad Race. I'm Fayola Douglas and today I'm joined by Dipti Shah. Dipti is a seasoned strategic people and culture advisor and founder of Conscious Rebel Leadership, with over 2 decades of experience shaping culture and leadership in advertising and media. She works with founders, CEOs and leadership teams to build high-performing, human-centred organisations, creating inclusive, high-trust cultures that drive performance. Her work combines strategic culture transformation with deep leadership development, creating emotionally intelligent, self-aware leaders. She believes performance means nothing if people are burnt out, disconnected, or afraid to speak up. She's been on senior leadership teams at organisations including Sky, Mediacom, Octagon Sports and Entertainment Network, shaping strategy, culture and ways of working at the highest level. Alongside her organisation work, she's also a board member at Good Nugget, a non-profit that runs an employability programme for emerging talent and mentors participants on their Kickstart programme. And this year she has joined the committee for Unseen Festival, a creative festival for fresh thinking, new voices and building hope for our industry. At the heart of everything she does, Dipti coaches founders and executives to lead with a conscious heart and a rebel mind, combining courage, self-awareness and humanity to make leadership feel possible, powerful and real. Welcome, Dipti.
Wow, thank you for that introduction, and it's so great to be here with you as well.
Thank you. You do so many different things, so it's I'm really excited to have this conversation and find out what led you into this area, and then also kind of where that's kind of led you to now, what your real passions are. So we're going to start off by talking about your education. I know you studied management at university, which is quite an unusual subject. I don't speak to a lot of people who studied management. So what led you to that decision to take that path?
Yeah, and I mean, I think even thinking about this, right? Like before I even got to the management degree, I mean, my A levels have got nothing to do with the management degree. So I ended up doing chemistry, biology, geography kind of for A level. And there were subjects that I was really, really good at. But I think for me, business and particularly kind of business management's always been a core part of my journey. So my family ran a toy shop business sort of while I was kind of growing up. So I got exposed to, I guess, that entrepreneurial
Yeah.
business way from a very, very young age. And it was nothing big and kind of, fancy like a lot of the corporates and things that we see, or that, some of the companies that I've inside now. But it always kind of sparked this curiosity, and particularly business and people and how all of that sort of comes together. Um, so that was kind of how I think I really made my choice around wanting to go into business and understanding it from very many different perspectives. I wasn't sure exactly what part of business at that point I was kind of really, really kind of curious about. And That's kind of when I sort of decided to sort of go for it at university, and figure it out from there.
And how did you find your time at university?
I would say, I think for me, university was a real reckoning in many, many ways. And I came, from a really big family, had lots of people around me kind of all the time, and was really, really busy, I think, kind of growing up doing all sorts of things and lots of things. So for me, I think I really came into my own for university. I'm from London, but I kind of went away up to Manchester for university. And I think those kind of 4 years, I would say, was really kind of grounding in terms of shaping sort of me. I think me understanding me, kind of what was important to me, kind of my way of sort of wanting to do things. So I think from a very personal standpoint, like that experience kind of really, really shaped me. And I think from the actual degree that I did, it gave me a really good grounding and understanding of all the different aspects of kind of what it takes for a business to be successful. and I think really kind of understand like within that, like where was I being kind of drawn to? What was it that I really wanted to kind of experience in the real world, kind of as I completed it. I'd also say I think for me, uni taught me some skills now that I look back, just around, I think, critical thinking. That's kind of been super
Yeah.
important. I think knowing how to um, research things, knowing how to kind of put presentations together. Like, I feel like I think in that doing that degree, it kind of very gave me that very direct, relevant experience, which then later made a number of things easier as I kind of transferred like into actually organization.
Yeah. And were before doing your degree, were you already exposed, or had you had any previous exposure to like corporate structures and how these bigger businesses would be formed and the different departments and how they would kind of work with leadership or work with HR and comms and the other elements of businesses?
I would say that I would spend like my summers, like before I went to university, um, doing work experience, and I tried to kind of do work experience in different companies. So I think one summer I ended up in like an accountancy firm, and kind of just understanding how that worked. I did some other kind of temp work with a pharmaceutical company one summer as well as I was kind of going through my GCSEs and A levels. So I think, with that, and then also exposure to the family business as well, like there was some kind of understanding. Um, to be honest, I think media advertising industry was not on my radar, and it came much kind of later. And in some ways, I kind of fell into it a little bit as well.
Yeah. So I know after university you went on to have a career in HR. How did you go about securing that first role? I know you've obviously said you had some work experience, so you had a bit of exposure to um, being employed and that world. So yeah, how did you get that first job?
Oh, wow. So I went to uni at a time where, or coming out of uni, where there was a thing like called graduate schemes, and so it was quite a big thing back then. And if you could get yourself onto one of these graduate schemes, it kind of like, I guess, turbocharged your career, because you'd be on a 2-year program, and they'd like pay for you to, if you're going to specialize in an area, they kind of pay for you to sort of do that alongside it. And I remember coming out of uni thinking, I'm going to get one of those. Like I, had really good um, academic results. Like I had a really good university degree. I had some experience. I did some other things. All the things they tell you that if you kind
Yeah.
of check all these boxes, like you should be kind of in the running for it. Plot twist, it didn't happen in that way. I
Oh,
applied for, yeah, so I applied for like a number of those graduate schemes, and it
yeah.
just didn't kind of happen. And actually, especially in HR, getting into my first role was quite hard. I mean, I still see this sometimes now, but it's like wanting you to have experience, even though you're starting out in your career. And it's like, but if you don't give me a role to get experience in, it's going to be kind of really hard to sort of do that. But anyway, eventually, um, I applied to kind of a number of roles, and I ended up actually starting a role in the NHS, doing recruitment for them. And I've always been someone, I think, that doesn't sit still. And so for me, I saw it as a way to get in, and it wasn't quite exactly what I wanted to kind of be doing or sort of being exposed to. But kind of getting into that, I was also sitting as part of a wider HR team. And I think about 9 months into that job, I kind of started to see if I could take more on,
Yeah.
and kind of do more of the like generalist HR stuff. Um, and that I spent a couple of years there, and I kind of that's where I think really started in gaining some sort of my HR experience. And I think after about 2 years, I realized and sort of decided that public sector NHS isn't quite where I wanted to build my career. I wasn't someone that necessarily had like this very clear or structured plan of exactly what was going to happen or how I wanted kind of, I guess, my career to evolve. I just knew that it wasn't kind of the place I wanted to necessarily kind of build. And I think I got given some advice early on is that if you stay too long, you kind of get pigeonholed into that, and it's quite difficult to sort of break out. So after 18, no, 2 years, just over 2 years of spending time there, I decided to actually resign from that role with nothing to go to next.
Wow, scary.
Yeah, it was there was definitely there was logic in the madness or kind of I think some intention behind it, and it was very much around I think wanting to be available to sort of immediately jump on to the next opportunity. And I think by that point, I'd kind of also been looking at different industries and different sectors and kind of knew at that point that I wanted to kind of jump into media, advertising, kind of that space. I had sort of an affinity and a kind of alignment sort of to it. And the risk paid off because I ended up kind of getting my first role at the BBC and kind of, straight into a big HR change project. And that kind of really then sort of lay the foundations of everything else that then came.
Nice. So obviously thinking back to those like first two roles, like one NHS, the other side BBC, how different were they to one another? Like was it a big change moving over to work at a media organisation like the BBC?
Yes, I think like for me, I mean, culturally, it's so different. And I guess what I mean kind of by that is the NHS was much more bureaucratic. It was kind of a lot sort of slower pace in decision
Yeah.
making. It was a very different kind of setup in the way that it was sort of run. And particularly the part that I was kind of working in, it was run predominantly by like clinicians and like medical people that were running kind of business. So it was really like a different dynamic and kind of who was actually the decision maker in that as well. And everything was slow and everything took kind of a lot longer. And I think jumping into the BBC and particularly the work I was doing, and even that, it was suddenly fast paced, commercial, like everything, kind of had a means to an end. There was a lot more grey. There was a lot more opportunity to think creatively, do creatively in that sense. So it was a real kind of night and day. And I just even remember like back then we were in offices and even the environment of those offices in the NHS versus
Yeah.
kind of turning up at the BBC Media Centre or the television centre kind of back then. It was like night and day. And, I think for me, what I've always, or what I really appreciated about the BBC and then continue to appreciate is this ability to always kind of be very creative in our industry. And it doesn't matter what role you do or what you're in, but this kind of ability to think outside the box and do things in a different way. Whereas I think that wasn't really possible or was a very different kind of route to that with the NHS.
So do you have any pivotal learnings that you really took away from the NHS, like something from that time that I guess still resonates with you now? I know you said there was some advice about possibly not staying there too long, but was there any other really good advice or anything else that you learnt from that time?
I think because that was so early on, really so early on in my career, probably kind of less so anything kind of pivotal. I think the pivotal stuff for me came as I kind of progressed further
Yeah.
in different organizations kind of within sort of the media industry. So, like I think my time at the BBC it was very project driven and delivery based. So, I was on a huge change management program, doing kind of a HR piece as part of a team. And that wasn't like your traditional route into HR either, because it was transformation. It was like organizational design. It was that type of role. Um, and probably for me, I didn't get my real grounding, so to speak, or foundations in HR until I kind of stepped into the to my sky role, and I kind of took all this experience with me, but it wasn't
Yeah.
until probably that point that maybe some of those kind of more profound pivotal moments sort of came along.
Nice. So what can you let us know what any of those were?
Yeah.
Yeah, from your time at Sky.
Um, I think for me, the shift really came from, I'd always been someone that kind of worked hard, and that's sort of part and parcel, I think, of kind of who I am. And that shone through. And I think I really started to realize as I stepped into kind of my sky role, like actually that's great. But it's kind of not enough. I was sort of thrown into a role where I was exposed to senior leadership very quickly. Like I was making decisions with them around influencing the direction of businesses. So I think for me, it was the moment of kind of going, well, what else do I kind of need to like really learn to be successful in this? And I think it was very much around starting to come into my own around sort of visibility across the business. I think starting to really think about it sounds, I don't think I ever used this language before, but I think now it's like, people talk about kind of what does your own brand kind of look
Yeah.
like who are you, kind of what are you for known for, right? And I think for me, those were the key things back then, learning to kind of speak up, learning to kind of have a voice. I think, navigating different sort of relationships. I think really kind of understanding the important like relationships and influences that exist within an organization, and how you have your support network, your allyship, and kind of that's kind of really going to help you progress in your career as well.
Yeah. So thinking about your career progression, I know that you went from HR consultant to senior business partner and then onto HR director and then chief people officer. Like, what is the key thing that people really need to know about career progression? Like, beyond having a personal brand and I guess being known for one thing, like, what really allowed you to progress so far in your career in those organizations?
I mean, when you read it like that or put it like that, it feels like it was a very kind of step by step progression. And the reality is, it really kind of wasn't, right. And I think I would really say like widen your like lens around what career progression is, right. So for me, I don't think I was ever chasing necessarily a job title or kind of going by this
Yeah.
day, this age, I want to get to kind of X. For me, I think there was always at the heart of it was this like curiosity around business and kind of people, and thriving people, thriving business is kind of what I say, and how the two really interconnected. So I actually looked at roles and opportunities that kind of really fed that curiosity and allowed me to like deepen my expertise kind of in it. So I would kind of say, I think to people, that never go to sort of tunnel vision on kind of like that career progression piece, and sort of look at where you're going to be exposed to really different experiences. So for me, it was like actually the difference between a media organization and how it operated, to an advertising agency that sat in a network, to an independent design agent. So it was kind of different business models, and kind of how I learned different things from those, from a people and a kind of culture aspect. So I think I always let curiosity and interest lead me sort of on that. I think when you think about um, career progression, it's kind of what really interests you and sustains you. And then I think it's not being afraid to actually, one of the other things is not being afraid to actually know when to necessarily leave an organization, or go, actually, this experience, this role that I've done, it's served me, and I've got all of that there. There's more opportunity here, and I can kind of either continue or grow, or actually it's time to kind of move sort of on to the next thing. And I think not being afraid to own that and sort of go with it. I've always kept very open-minded in terms of what that progression kind of looks like. And I mean, I'll give you another example where my time at Sky, I at one point decided that I wanted to second into like a product placement team. They're nothing to do with like HR whatsoever, but just the curiosity of kind of how does that work over there? Like how can I maybe go into being fully part of the business and then really understand the people staff or an area from a very, very different perspective. And so it is the combination, I think, of that curiosity and I guess drive that's kind of always been more of a North Star than necessarily wanting to reach a certain level.
Yeah. And how about in terms of managing a team? Because obviously, going from HR consultant to being chief people officer, you have a member of a team, and then you become the head of your own team. People working across HR and that part of the business. How did that really change and develop you?
Um, I think I've been really fortunate. That's been a real kind of natural like progression in terms of working kind of really independently to smaller teams and that. And I think for me, the shift or the step change in that is that when you, particularly when you, I think, become a leader and you are um, responsible for other people, is also your own shift change around helping others succeed. So for me, it was really having to shift from a mindset of telling and doing everything and driving everything to kind of going, actually, here's a team of people that I'm now working with that I want to have take kind of ownership and sort of challenge, right, and kind of develop at the same time. So I think for me, and often I think for other leaders, it becomes this inflection point of like, well, how do I want to show up as a leader? What do I want to create as an environment for my team to kind of operate in? How do I create trust? How do I create psychological safety? How do I create a environment where all ideas can be put on the table and that we work together on that? And at the same time, where do I have to kind of drive in some of that decision making and kind of be authoritative in some ways and collaborative in kind of other ways as well. And so I think that's a journey you start and it never kind of ends and you're kind of always evolving. But I think particularly when it comes to like managing people and teams, you're in it real time and you're having to figure it out, and it's not perfect and sometimes it can kind of be a bit messy. But I think being intentional and I think being self-aware goes a long way in helping your team thrive as well.
Nice. So I know kind of when people think about HR, especially at some of these really big corporate entities, they feel like HR is there to, I guess, protect the needs of the business and not so much for the employee. Like, how were
Mm,
you able to balance it during that time in your career working at some of these corporate entities, thinking about like the needs of the business versus the people that really kind of create the teams and do the
mm.
work?
I guess my lens on that firstly is I am there to protect the business, but my lens on it is that bigger than that, I'm here to make sure that actually what the organization's vision, kind of purpose, the very big thing is what I'm upholding. And so when it's through that lens, it's not kind of through the protecting bit is often, let's be very honest, leaders behaving badly. So for me, it's not that. It was always about actually how do you uphold what this organization's about and what the values are. And for me, that was always then about a culture of opportunity, of thriving, of kind of creating, coming at it from that lens. creates a very different conversation, I think, around a leadership team, and a very different starting point of how you're seeing culture and then the culture that you're creating. Um, and for me, some of these organizations that I used to join in, I mean, a lot of people may remember this, but like HR would be tucked away in a corner, and you'd kind of only see HR people when something is not good is sort of
Yeah.
happening, or you'd see kind of people sat in a room, in a glass meeting room, and everyone's like, oh, what's going on there? I wonder what that conversation's about. It can't be good. And
Yeah,
so,
it's when you join and when you leave. That's
right?
that
That's when you
used to
see,
be
that's
how it
when you
was. Yeah.
see, right? And so for me, even those things of like, I think breaking those perceptions and breaking those ideas of what the role HR plays. So, like I think certainly in a couple of organizations where we as a HR team, when I started, were like tucked away, like one of the things I really did was actually go, no, we're moving out into the main part of where the businesses were going to kind of be physically very visible. We're going to actually show people the kind of the real sort of human lens that we lead through. We're going to talk about all the other good stuff, right? You're not just going to see us come and go when, to your point, exactly, right, where someone's coming in or kind of someone's leaving. And some of these things like sound like really kind of small things, but I think it was so important for me to really shift the perception of like what um, really good HR, what I call people and culture, is about, and actually that it's a real catalyst for growth, kind of for people, for businesses, and that people thriving is business thriving. And it's kind of a bit of a mantra that I kind of always sort of talk about, but fundamentally kind of believe as well. And don't get me wrong, like there's been situations where um, uh, I've had to deal with like really difficult stuff. And I think that's been quite hard, because sometimes there are things where the business makes a decision of how they want to handle something. It perhaps doesn't align with my kind of values, or perhaps the approach that I would recommend that we take. And in those times, I think it was sort of really having to um, get to a place of a decision has been made, and then kind of getting on board with that sort of decision, and then supporting the business to kind of do that in the
Yeah.
best possible way.
Yeah, I can imagine. You have to work in a bit of a strategic way, I guess. It's like it's not necessarily everything's always going to go your way, but as somebody who's working within a business and within certain constructs, there's a way that you have to, I guess, adhere to whatever bigger thing is going on, whether it's like big structural changes and things to that end. Um, so of course, like people are very central to your work. So being in HR and leadership, how does diversity really factor into that?
I mean, I think, particularly through a very personal lens, as a South Asian woman in an industry where, particularly, I think racial diversity is it's not always been kind of visible. And I think even sort of gender diversity as well, right? I think if I think about a lot of the roles that I've played in the leadership teams that I've kind of sat on, it's been very kind of heavily male sort of dominant. So, I think there's a very personal kind of lived experience there of sort of what that means, from not necessarily always feeling safe to speak up, or being very other perspective kind of in the room, and being sometimes shut down, or sometimes being made to feel like I wasn't quite on board because I had such a different opinion on things. So I think there's like, for me, there was kind of, I think, navigating and experiencing, a lot of that quite early on in my career, really made me think about actually how organizations sort of need to shape sort of culture, and kind of ensure that that doesn't happen not to just for somebody that looks like me, but a sort of from a much more sort of broader perspective. If we think about, a industry that is meant to really be reflective of society and serve society culturally, kind of on a whole.
Yeah.
So I think my work, particularly kind of around all of that, um, has really kind of been around how do we get more diverse talent into the industry and organizations, but even more so, how are we creating cultures that enable everybody to thrive, and that both those things are kind of happening at the same time. I think you'll remember sort of what happened around sort of COVID time, and lots of organisations post George Floyd really starting to suddenly think about diversity and inclusion for the first time, or it seemed like they were starting to kind of
Yeah, we
think
even
about it for the first
had
time.
agencies changing. People had to change their names. Even it got yeah, it was a big movement within the advertising media world. People really kind of taking that introspective look at themselves as organisations.
Yeah, and so when that kind of happened, there was this surge in the work that needed it to be done, and I think there was some organizations that genuinely took the time to really understand where they are, and then come up with kind of a really long-term plan on the work that needed to be done. And then there were some businesses that kind of knee jerk reacted and just quickly sort of started to do activity, but it was kind of really, really like disjointed. It was really very surface level things, kind of around, whether it was suddenly training for everyone around inclusive language, or that type of thing. So I think um, in our industry, and particularly in my work, it's important that it's really embedded at the foundations of a kind of organization, and it's not just looking at it through a people and kind of culture lens. It's sort of looking at it from a broader, um, even like, so creativity, for examples, and how ad campaign ideas are kind of brought together, and who are the creatives in the room
Yeah,
that are doing that, and who are um, um, what does some of that kind of look like, kind of to clients, and sort of reflecting that. So I think um, it's something that is really important across an entire organization, and I'm still not sure if it's kind of as joint up as it could be.
from your past experience, obviously being inside a number of different organisations, do you feel like today that the advertising and marketing industry is diverse when you think about the people and the teams that are working across the industry in the UK?
I think we sort of saw a surge of it kind of happen, like around that. I think some pockets of the industry um, have been doing it doing it well. And I think where I see that, I also see that actually it's generally like diverse leadership teams,
Yeah,
um, where it is kind of really taken seriously, right? And they've embedded it in. Where that isn't the case, it's very kind of piecemeal, and I don't think it's kind of sort of moved on that much. I think we can be doing a lot better. I don't believe we've moved on enough, or kind of further forward. I think what's interesting, and kind of what's sort of happening over the recent kind of number of years, is that I think where different sectors are not feeling kind of included, they're kind of like, actually, enough's enough. I'm going to go out and I'm going to create my own thing. I'm going to kind of do my own thing. And I don't want to sit inside, or I can't wait and do not want to wait for a system to try and kind of figure and sort itself out. So that's really interesting, I think, in terms of what's happening and kind of what's shifting. But there is so much more to do. I don't know about your experiences, but my experience is like I still turn up in rooms in the industry, and can be kind of one of a handful of people in, you know, a sea of hundreds of people, that is kind of diverse or different to everybody else in the room. And I still find that kind of really, really, I think, striking and shocking just from a kind of visual perspective, kind of let alone anything else. And I think there's a lot of senior people of like diverse background that are choosing a kind of different path, or feel like they've kind of hit the ceiling, and you know there's nowhere else to kind of sort of go. So um, if anything, I think we're going backwards, um,
Yeah.
a little bit. Maybe not a little bit, quite a lot actually. Like I think, you know, uh, and I just think, given we think about kind of current political climate and kind of everything else, sort of feeding into that at the moment, it does feel like it's having an impact, and that we're kind of reversing some of the perhaps good work that was done.
Yeah, it makes me sometimes feel like that maybe that surge of interest and energy that we had off the back of George Floyd's murder, like, was it actually counterintuitive? Like, maybe because there was such an influx, we've kind of gone up and then gone down. It maybe might have been better, and we'll never know if there was just that steady growth and interest in the area that was then more sustainable for organisations. But
Yeah. Sense is it was it my sense is that I think, for some it was a reaction to shame, and almost like the guilt of not having kind of done enough around it, right? And I think it was kind of highlighted, and I think when you do it from that place, it's not sustainable, right? So yeah, I think it'll be interesting kind of to really see what happens in that space. You know, you've seen a lot of people that specialize in that space and that work, organizations that have kind of like declined in their existence, and kind of demand as well. So I'm curious to kind of see what comes next.
so I know that another area that's also really important to touch on is, um, when we think about ageism within the advertising industry. Like, we don't really see, well, there's a lot of women in the advertising industry, and when we look at the figures for the gender divide, it's really quite equal until we start getting towards people being older people. So especially women over 50, like, why don't we see many women over 50 working in advertising?
So I think it even starts by the time women kind of hit their probably their mid 40s as well, right? I mean, they're in the industry, but kind of the drop off like the 50 plus. And I think there's a number of like things that are going on. I think from an industry perspective, like there's a real like unconscious perception of kind of women in their 50s. So this idea of kind of they're not culturally like relevant anymore. They're not with it. They don't understand like all the trends that are coming up, etc. Which is actually, I'm going to say, like batshit bonkers, because if you take like men of that age, there's like this other perception of like actually experience, authoritative. Like we don't actually attach the same kind of perception to them. So it's kind of really, really sort of bizarre. I think so. There's that side of it. I think there are other things that kind of go on as well, which is um, I think women really hit a wall around that kind of age, and are just actually I I don't want to kind of continue in this way. Often, again, in organisations that do not kind of, I think, support sort of them. Think about kind of the transitions women go through kind of at that age. I think
Yeah.
the way women are kind of treated in terms of this perception of being irrelevant versus actually comes with them wisdom, experience, emotional intelligence, like actually probably more self-aware than any other kind of category. So from a leadership standpoint, there's like so much kind of sort of positivity, but that's not necessarily what is rewarded. And I
Yeah.
think women are also kind of really pushing back on that, kind of going, I'm not going to kind of really put up with this sort of if I don't have to, right? And then yeah, I think women go through such a shift and transition, and when that's kind of not supported, they look to what they're going to sort of do differently themselves. And I think there's a real movement of empowering themselves in doing something differently as well.
So, as an industry, what do you feel like we are losing by not retaining this older female talent?
So I think I touched on it a little bit in terms of when we look at, I think from a leadership lens, we're really missing out on kind of some real innate, like intuitive skills that are particular to women, and it's not always gendered, right? But kind of
Yeah.
a lot of that is sort of is from that sort of mature, wise, like female perspective. I think the other thing which I still find really, really shocking is that if you think about fundamentally what the industry is about, and that's getting to a consumer, to buy something at the end of it, or to have affinity to a brand. Now, that category of women, kind of 40, 50, like actually that is the category that most these brands and organizations are trying to entice. And actually it's the group that have like really high buying power and also influence decisions. I mean, you think about travel, health, I mean, you name the industry or the category, and it's women of that kind of particular age making those decisions. So again, it feels bonkers that the very people that you're trying to actually ultimately target and reach are not kind of sitting around your leadership tables or your creative teams or your strat teams or your client services team. So there's a whole heap of insight, knowledge and expertise kind of literally gone sort of overnight.
Yeah, and when I think about any like big kind of consumer groups, I'm kind of thinking, okay, so who's doing the Christmas shopping? Who's choosing
Right?
which supermarket you're going to be buying everything at? Who's going to be organising like how that whole day progresses? And um, not to stick to gendered stereotypes, but a lot of advertising it obviously does, and that's how
Mm,
things work. And usually it's going to be those women who are in that the age category, like we said, over 45, who are going to be kind of driving that purchase power and those decisions for a household.
yeah. But even like a category like automotive, right? Like, so again, to your point, not to gender it, but often cars, men is sort of kind of the association. But actually, in terms of where families are looking for a car, it's likely that the woman in that kind of setup is going to look at like safety features and things like that are going to be really important if they've got family or kind of other things. So again, it's still women predominantly influencing kind of where ultimately that spend sort of goes, right? And so yeah, it's a really it strikes me as so bizarre.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense because when we think we we read loads of these stories that are all about how women in within a household they're carrying like a certain mental load. So they're the ones thinking about, okay, is the car seat going to fit into that vehicle? Like all those other little questions. That's what will be on their mind, versus maybe their partner or their spouse. So yeah, it makes sense for more older women to be around when they're thinking about the advertising and marketing of those categories as well. So what do you think can be done to really help address this? To, I guess, make women that are over 50 not feel pushed out, make them want to stay within the advertising industry, because it's not the fact that they were never there, it's the fact that they're dropping off when they're reaching a certain age, they're leaving or exiting these agencies or these brands. Maybe it is to start something of their own, or they're just exiting
Mm.
the workforce entirely.
Yeah, I think it's I think there's like it's so multifaceted in terms of what I think kind of needs to sort of happen, right? And I think if I
Yeah.
think about it from a my kind of, I guess, people and culture sort of lens on, I think it's still the evolution of like what cultures need to kind of really look like to support and support kind of, I think, women from a working perspective, right? But I think from kind of their own sort of uh, development and sort of championing. So there is, I think, still kind of a lot of work that needs to be done kind of around that piece. I think things like the gender pay gap, that's work that still needs to kind of continue on, but it needs to actually, I think, start to kind of really ramp up kind of the way it's sort of being addressed. And when we talk about culture, I think it's also like the like decision making and the way of working kind of within organizations that kind of really need to shift to enable kind of, I think, women uh, to not feel like they're kind of always in this sort of fight against the system. So even connected to that, it would be kind of how pay and promotion, and so what is rewarded, what behaviors are kind of actually being celebrated kind of within sort of organization. So I still think it goes back to so many of the uh, foundations of a lot of like the people and culture piece, right? And particularly from a behavior lens and from the way people show up and kind of do their work to really shift that. I think the other part is that we're at a really interesting time now of organizations, like I think really looking at kind of how they are setting themselves up. To your point, a lot of women are potentially leaving or wanting more flexibility in the way that they work. And I think flexibility, not meaning they want to do less or got less ambition, but they need it to kind of fit a certain lifestyle because of, perhaps it's still caring for children or parents or kind of other
Yeah.
responsibilities. So I think there is something about really organizations figuring out kind of what that culture needs to be to kind of support it, or if there's a very different model as well.
Thinking now about your current work as founder of Conscious Rebel Leadership, kind of how does this factor into kind of what you're doing currently? And can you tell me a bit more about Conscious Rebel Leadership?
Yeah, so conscious rebel leadership was, I think, born from, I mean, so many things that we've kind of sort of spoken about, right? But I think at the very heart of it is the idea of how do you put the humanness of leadership with kind of this idea and expectation of high performance kind of in organizations, and very much born on the premise of thriving people means kind of thriving business. So a lot of the work that I kind of do now, it often kind of starts because someone's come to me and gone, something feels a bit off. So it could be the leadership team's not quite kind of aligned or going in kind of one direction. The business is sort of scaling and they want to really sort of think about their culture kind of intentionally and sort of building it
Yeah.
kind of from sort of the foundations rather than trying to then retrospectively kind of sort of fit that in. So I'll often go in and kind of work with leadership teams around kind of their vision, their values, the behaviors that they really want to kind of have show up in the day to day, the way the organization wants to kind of operate and evolve. And that's very much like the cultural piece around it. I do one-on-one leadership coaching work as well, and so that's very much about working on kind of leaders like mindset and sort of what are the shifts that kind of need to happen as they evolve their kind of organizations and grow and scale. And the final bit is I sit as a fractional chief people officer, so I'll go and sort of embed within organizations, work with CEOs or leaders around kind of their people strategy, and then sort of support in terms of really kind of embedding that sort of within the organization. So either directly with the CEO or as an extension of kind of maybe what they've currently got in as part of their kind of HR team as well. I think business is people, and if you can really understand what people need, and the environment that is required for people to thrive, um, your business will always kind of grow and succeed as a part of that. And I think there's something for me is going into lots of organizations is that people always give. People have good intent. People give, I think, a lot more than they get back from organizations often. And it's a time where you're supporting people through many life transitions as well. So how do you create an environment and an opportunity that supports you, kind of helps you grow, helps you become the best version of you, whether you choose to stay in that organization or kind of then go off into the next place. But actually, if it's within the industry, everybody benefits at some point. It's kind of this ecosystem of like raising standards, and I think raising what people should expect from organizations as well.
Nice. And so when it comes to organisations, I feel, especially in the advertising industry, it always feels like there's an emphasis put on creating this like fun, creative culture that really, I guess, helps to foster emerging talent. Do you think that enough work is put into creating a good culture around the leadership though, and that supports the leadership teams as well and people at the other end of the business?
Well, I think actually leadership teams and the behavior of the individuals and collectively is ultimately what sets the tone of the culture of the organization, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, I think, where I also do spend quite a bit of time doing that work. My experience is sometimes it's almost like this disconnect between leaders at that level and their understanding of kind of the impact and the influence they're having directly on the culture. And so I connect them back to it and make them kind of understand that you actually set the tone, and it's not kind of how you turn up in one meeting or presentation to the company. It's actually in the day to day, the way that you kind of operate, and what you expect and ask of people, and the way that you treat them. So, if you've got someone who is a leader that is very chaotic and quite reactive in terms of what they're expecting of their people, and that manifests in the way that they run meetings, or it manifests in the way that they kind of ask of their team of certain things. Well, there's a ripple effect to that, and the likelihood is the next person down is going to also operate in the same kind of way, and on it goes. And so
Yeah.
it creates a certain environment, right, which probably actually uh, people are probably on tenterhooks, don't know if they're coming or kind of going, don't ask many questions. There's so many different things that creates. So I think for me, it's very much getting those teams and individuals to really understand, and be very kind of self-aware of the impact that they're kind of having. And you can have all the great fun stuff, um, that is part of it is sort of part of the culture, but it's more part of the environment than it is actually the culture that you're kind of creating of an organization. But if there isn't kind of structure, if there isn't clarity around the way things are done, I don't think it matters kind of at what stage of your career that you're at. It's going to have a negative kind of impact, and it's going to probably be somewhere where a lot of people don't see a longevity of future either.
So what issue do you see cropping up, I guess, again and again, with leaders? Like, what are they needing? help with the most often?
I still think like leadership development, in terms of the skills, sort of really needed to not just lead teams, right, but lead in terms of business challenges. It's a really underdeveloped area. And I think what we're seeing is kind of all of it's getting more and more kind of complex. If we think about sort of some of the things we've talked about through the DE&I kind of lens, so kind of at a time where, you know, some organizations are kind of thriving, others are like having to look at kind of reducing their size. Like all these things are very actually complex and often difficult things to navigate, and leaders are still not quite equipped to manage that or handle that, right? And I still think I see through and through people are put into leadership roles, but without kind of the support, or the teachings of kind of how to sort of navigate any of that.
What would you say concerns you most then about the industry, and how can we be addressing that from a people and culture perspective?
I think there's like a few things going on kind of on, I think, in the industry. So we just touched on it. I think, you know, leadership
Yeah.
capability, and that gap's, you know, if we're not careful, only getting bigger, sort of in that. I think talent pipeline is another one. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of junior roles at the moment kind of either disappearing, or like there's only very few opportunities kind of at that junior level. And, you know, I appreciate there's kind of AI and the role it's going to kind of play in the industry
Yeah.
and the impact that that has, which is an interesting one. But I think this idea of like cutting out or replacing junior talent is actually really short-term thinking, because where does the next generation of, like, when we need that kind of real mid-level talent level kind of management coming up, like the next kind of, you know, rung of that, it's not there if we're careful, if we're not careful. So I think that's something of kind of that really needs to sort of be paid attention to. I think innovation and agility, so like how organizations are actually looking at kind of how they're structuring themselves, like the specialisms that they kind of have, how they're making decisions. So often in our industry, decisions are made kind of on very short term thinking, and, you know, that's, I think, partly because of the nature of the way the business models. But again, I think really sort of thinking kind of longer term, and I think being a lot more agile than a lot of kind of organizations are, is going to be really important. And then the other, I mean, there's a few, but I think the other one, well-being, like, you know, burnout, is a really really big thing. I think with a lot of the efficiencies that we've seen across the industry recently, you know, teams are significantly reduced, and then you've got smaller teams that kind of, the work hasn't reduced necessarily, but or the demand, but it's kind of smaller teams and bigger expectations. So, you know, how do we sustain people in organizations, and when there so many things are kind of working against that at the moment as well.
Yeah, I guess it's difficult to see things as a successful cost saving exercise if it comes at the detriment of your team, and yeah, people, I guess, staying within your organization. There's a cost that comes to people leaving, like, effectively,
Yeah,
isn't there?
yeah.
Brilliant. So Dipti, where can people find you online and kind of follow up with you, find out more about what you do?
So I'm on LinkedIn, so you can kind of definitely find me on there. I'm always open to kind of a conversation, a coffee or a chat. So, you know, definitely kind of find me there. I've got my website as well, www.theconsciousrebel.co.uk. So you can also kind of find me there too.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me. It was so interesting to get into some of the intricacies of like leadership and how HR really functions in this day and age.
Thank you. It's been really good kind of chatting to you about it, and yeah, taking a bit of a trip down memory lane as well. Just reflecting on some kind of, I think, really big opportunities and challenges kind of ahead in the industry as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.